This conference will now be recorded.
Phyllis. All right. Can everyone hear us? Yes. I will call to order the Tuesday, May 19th, 2020 meeting of the Monmouth City Council and ask Phyllis Bowman, our city recorder, to do the roll call, please.
Councillor Belts.
Here.
Councillor Carey.
Here.
Councillor Lopez.
Here.
Councillor Sharmer.
Here.
Councillor Schinkel.
Here.
Councillor Silbernagel.
Here.
Mayor Kuntz.
Here. And although you can't see it since we turned the camera around, there is a flag here. If you would join us in the flag salute, and I'll have Chad lead that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first item this evening is a presentation on the water rate analysis that we've been working through with Deb Gillardy, and we've got Russ here to help kick that off for us. Russ Cooper.
Yeah, so what Deb is going to present tonight is her work on the water rate study, and she's got a PowerPoint, I believe, that she will run you through, and at the end of that, we'll have time for questioning. So with that, I think Deb can take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Do we have the PowerPoint? Janet, are you sharing on your end?
Phyllis, are you sharing?
Yes, I can.
Something's coming.
She learned how to do that.
Can everyone hear me okay?
We're working on it.
Aha, great. Let's see, that's the memo, looks like.
Yeah, I don't have a PowerPoint.
Oh, the PowerPoint was in an email today. I will forward it to you.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. I thought you were on that email.
At least I'm not running anything. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Phyllis, you should have it.
Okay. Stand by, it's almost there.
Ta-da.
Okay.
Very good.
You can give her the keyboard and controls, Phyllis, and then she can behave like she's actually doing this PowerPoint as opposed to showing us all the individual slides. You need me to move? Not you, him.
Okay, so.
You should have it, Deb.
Okay, whoops. It looks like I'm scrolling around. Okay, let me get back.
You might have to hit enable editing in order to get it so you can go to the full slide mode.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Okay, so it says Phyllis is presenting.
Yep.
You can try giving her presenter capabilities. I just don't know if you'll get it back, Phyllis.
I just did. She'll just have to give it back to me.
Is she able to take the entire screen?
I don't.
Let me see.
That's just our view of it.
I can probably see.
They can make it so they can each see the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, our screen, yeah, I mean, it's
Okay.
Yeah.
individual, right. Do you want to see it bigger?
No, we're fine.
I got this little plus thing here, look.
That's okay. I would just collapse the
People.
These
the
guys.
people.
No.
There you go.
See, I can do this stuff.
I know, but
Never doubted.
is Deb talking though? Is anyone talking?
Deb, can I hear you?
Oh,
Zach took off and
I can get them back in a heartbeat. Seriously, can any of them hear us? Hello, can you guys hear us still?
We
Yes.
can
Oh, yeah, you're not.
certainly still hear you, yes.
Deb shows that she's muted on my screen.
We just cannot hear Deb.
We cannot hear Deb at all. So Deb got muted somehow.
How did Deb get muted? Can you?
Okay,
unmute?
how's that?
Oh, that's much better.
there we go.
Okay. All right, technology, gotta love it. Okay,
Deb, can you go back and start over?
you bet, I will be happy to. Let me,
Although I'm afraid to ask.
Right?
go back. Okay, so this evening, now that you can hear me, we'll talk about the development of the financial plan, a little recap from our overview last time. Then we'll get into the specifics of the financial plan, importantly, the capital improvements, what the current rates can fund in terms of capital and operational improvements, and then the preliminary financial plan. So just to recap, the process that we went through is to first identify what sources of funds are available for the water system expenses. And given this is an enterprise fund, we use specific revenues from the system, which is primarily user charges, monthly user charges, as well as development charges, capital improvements, as well as some other miscellaneous fees as well. On the operating expenses, we're talking about the personnel, electricity, chemicals, commodities, and contract services. And that does include some routine repair and replacement of small items. When we talk about capital, we're talking about the large project improvements that are identified in the master plan primarily. And there's, then we look at we'll talk about how to fund those, both in terms of cash funding as well as other options like debt service, and in your case also potentially urban renewal funds. Other requirements include transfers to the general fund for support services, franchise fees like the other utilities pay to the city, and reserves, particularly reserves for future capital maintenance that's been also identified in the master plan. We forecast out what we call the requirements, the revenue requirements, compare that to the revenue under existing rates and how that is forecast to change with respect to growth and changes in water consumption. And then we can identify what's the gap in terms of how much additional revenue do the rates need to generate to cover the expenses, or how do we need to change the schedule of capital improvement projects. So if I look in my crystal ball, what are some of the things in terms of forecasting out these revenues and expenditures, some of the factors that we consider? As I mentioned, we look at consumption as the number of accounts and the amount of water sales are obviously big factors driving how much revenue you collect. So we look at the growth trends. We've assumed a 1% moderate growth rate. Consumption is variable both in terms of weather and economic conditions. We had a not particularly hot and dry summer last year, so consumption was actually down 7% compared to the prior year. And then, of course, we've got the COVID-19 impacts to institutional and non-residential consumption. So all of that is combined is driving down the revenue under existing rates, at least for the current year, by about 5% compared to the prior year. So then we need to forecast out how we expect that to change. There's going to be likely continued issues related to the economy, as well as even before COVID-19, in forecasting water sales, the industry standard is to assume that that's going to continue to decline on a per customer basis because of the retrofitting of low flow plumbing fixtures, new development that comes in, has these more efficient plumbing fixtures as well, and just general conservation. And then there's the phenomenon of price elasticity, that as the rates go up, customers tend to use less as well. So we factored in those considerations on the revenue side. On the expense side, we look at the operating budget, and then we forecast out different types of expense categories based on escalation factors that are both based on historical trends and general economic conditions, as well as things we know like PERS and the increases that are forecast for those expenses. An important consideration is your financial policies and maintaining a target 25% contingency reserve for the water fund. Finally, the master plan is a big consideration. That's a big part why you're doing this is you've got a draft master plan that has identified some significant capital improvements that are needed within the 10-year planning period and beyond. So we are looking at those as a significant cost driver in the financial forecast. This chart shows you the 10-year pattern of annual expenditures. The light blue is the master plan projects that are programmed for each year. The darker blue in the outer years is the potential capital maintenance reserve phasing in to start building capacity in the rates to fund the needed capital that's been identified beyond the 10-year period, which includes water main, water line replacements of asbestos pipe and other projects that are in the next window. As these water utilities, wastewater utilities are very capital intensive infrastructure. And so it drives a lot of the needs for funding. And this, in this 10-year window is no exception. The total that we're looking at here is $8.2 million, which has been adjusted for inflation. So that's our best estimate of what the actual cost would be in those given years. So when we look at the current budget in the current year and just see, well, how are you spending your money currently? And there's two different things to consider. One is, what do you have in your fund balance that you can utilize? But also just in terms of current revenue, and that means the revenue that's coming in the current year, what can it support? Because that's what's going to sustain you. You can't continue to live on your current balance, your fund balance. At a certain point, that will run out. So we look at what are the current revenues, which are just under 2 million, primarily from water sales. And then we look at the expenses. So we first look at the operation and maintenance costs. We've got to run the system. There's some equipment replacement. And then some of your transfers, both the repayment of the sewer loan, which will continue for 5 years, and for 2 years, the City Hall, a contribution from the water utility to the City Hall reserve. So what that means is after you pay these expenses out of these current revenues, you don't have much left available to fund the capital C, capital improvements identified in the master plan. You do have fund balance, and in fact, to fund the capital that has been identified for the current budget year of $635,000, that will require some drawing down use of your fund balance and potentially drawing some of the urban renewal, the URD stands for Urban Renewal District funding for those projects that are eligible for that type of funding. So the preliminary plan assumes some urban renewal contribution in the current year for projects eligible, as well as some other identified projects in the first 5-year window. On the operating side, just to be clear, when we talk about operation and maintenance costs, and you can see what the primary categories of those are in your budget, as generally the case, personnel costs are the largest chunk of it. Materials and services, including power, chemicals, things like that, some repair and replacement, support services from the general fund, and then the in lieu of tax and the franchise fee that are calculated as a % of the water sales revenue. So those are the main components of the 1.6 million in operating costs for the current year. Now, I should mention too that when we forecast, we do take into account that, generally speaking, and this is true across the industry, there is some difference in between what you budget and what you spend. And so we've adjusted down the operating budget by 8%. So we're including 92%. And that's based on that factor of saying, when we forecast out, we don't want to build based on a total budget that is higher than we think you'll actually spend. So that adjustment is made before we do the forecast and apply those future escalation factors. The preliminary capital funding plan is shown here. And so for funding that total 8.2 million, in the first 5-year period, we, as I mentioned, there are some urban renewal funds that could be utilized because there are eligible projects in the CIP. We've estimated what is available from SDC, Systems Development Charge revenue, that's growth related, and what revenue will be available. And we've programmed that money in, and then the remainder is what would need to come from water fund revenue. And this would be a combination of both that existing fund balance as well as current, the annual revenue from rates. And you can see what the primary projects are in the first 5 years. Important well and well field improvements being the biggest category, and starting to do some important water line replacement. The second 5-year is where you really ramp up on the water line replacement. And so this is the 10-year total, I should say. But you can see that that increases significantly. Then you've got some storage and pumping improvements that are needed as well. And this line item, AM&R, that's automatic meter technology. And capital maintenance would be starting to build that reserve for the future capital spending, or for the future water line replacement. You will notice that a couple things here. The urban renewal funds are only utilized in the first 5 years. And then in the second 5 years, we have assumed $1.5 million to fund the storage, pumping, and a portion of water line replacement to smooth out the rate impacts, because going from funding about $500,000 a year in capital to funding about $1 million a year in capital, the second 5 years would require very significant rate increases. This chart shows the plan in terms of expenses, which are the bars, O&M being, or operation and maintenance costs being the green bar, and then capital projects being the orange bar. And this is just the capital funded from the water fund. So it doesn't, it's already been net out the SDC contribution. And this line is your fund balance. This line is the revenue. And you can see that we have programmed in a smoothing of and phasing in of rate increases to fund the needed expenditures. And you can see in the beginning, your current revenues are not meeting your needed expenditures, so you're drawing down your fund balance. And then in the middle of the plan, the rate increases or the revenue would exceed the requirements of the current year, so you could build back up that balance and then draw back down. And this is how we use the rate increases and the fund balance to smooth the line over the period and to allow that phasing in to occur and hopefully minimize any significant rate shock that and defined by me as double-digit rate increases. So, but you'll notice that at the end, I mean, we have a bottleneck here where your fund balance gets down just to your minimum reserve level. And again, in the out years, and the end of the plan, the balance is projected to drop again because of this significant capital spending that's forecast for that second half of the 10-year period. We talked about last time that there's a big focus in the water industry on how to make rates and charges more resilient to continue to fund the needed infrastructure and provide the service. Part of that is having these moderate phased-in rate increases, which in your case, we've estimated to be 5 to 5.5% per year, or just over inflation. That additional 2 to 3%, depending on how inflation materializes as we go into more economic uncertainty, that that additional rate increase above the general cost escalation is needed to build up that capital capacity, which you currently don't have in the rates. The rate structure, which you're in really good shape on, should recover 30 to 40% of the revenue from fixed charges because of the volatility of consumption. As I said, consumption was down 7% from the prior year. The fact that 37% of your revenue comes from fixed charges that aren't impacted by consumption is a really solid ground. It could be higher, but it's within perfectly acceptable industry standards. And then the reserves, the fact that you're able to, in the current year, for example, draw on your fund balance to meet the expenses without having to do a more significant rate increase, is a function of the fact that you have that reserve policy that provides a cushion and the ability, some flexibility in how you utilize those funds. To give you just a sense as to where your rates stand with respect to other communities in the area and where we had some information, you can see here the current bill for an 800 cubic feet per month user, which is typical residential customer, is $39.19 under the current, and then with a 5% rate increase, that would increase to $41.15, which would put you right in about the middle of the comparison here. There's quite a range. The rates for the bills for Lebanon are close to $70 per month, and at the lower end of the range, about $31 per month in Dallas and state. So to summarize the preliminary recommendation, the annual rate increase that are forecast, as I mentioned, and these are per year, 5% in the current year, which is what is in your preliminary budget, and then 5.5% each year following, to meet both, continue to keep pace with inflation, but also to build up the capacity for the capital improvements and capital maintenance, to utilize urban renewal funding in years 1 through 5, and as well as long-term debt to help to moderate the rate increases. And while debt does add to the long-term cost of the improvements, it's also very helpful in smoothing out and allowing you to pay for large infrastructure investments over time. It will be important, particularly in the current circumstances, to continue to monitor closely the key revenue and expense variables, customer growth, water use, systems development charges, which come from the rate of growth and development, and to consider potentially, are your other fees, for example, your administrative fees, recovering their cost of service? Again, as an enterprise fund, you need to make sure that all of your charges are recovering the needed costs. And update the plan regularly and adjust as needed so that you're staying on top of those needed investments and can avoid having more significant rate increases down the road. That's what I had in terms of presentation. Happy to answer questions, and I can turn back the control if you'd like me to, Phyllis.
Yes, please.
Okay, let me figure out how to do that here in a second.
You did it.
There you
My arm is not long enough to reach my unmute. Thank you very much, Deb. That was great. And I thought very easy to follow, but I'm sure there are some questions to ensue. So what questions or comments do we have for Deb?
Byron has his hand up.
Byron, is that your hand up? See, we can't see with the shadow.
Lopez.
I know, but what's
And
Byron
Byron,
doing?
yes.
Yes, Byron, then Chris.
Thanks, Deb. I have a couple of questions. I'm looking at that list of cities you gave to us, comparing the rates on the average residential use. And I'm wondering, as a follow-up to that, what is the average annual increase that those communities are experiencing as well? And then secondly, all of these things on this capital improvement plan look very important and seem very important. You know, when you're talking about our potable water and things of that nature, those are obviously critical. But to 6 or 7 people who at the end of the day have to make the decision, how do we determine what things are perhaps necessary and distinguish those from things that might be on a wish list? Does that make sense?
Sure. And being an economist and not an engineer, I'm going to let Russ take that, or perhaps Chad take that question. And yeah, in terms of the other communities and what kind of rate increases they're facing, for this specific list of cities, I do know that Salem adopts rate increases for every 2 years. They have, and each community is different. They have a issue with, you might have heard, in terms of their water supply, with some algae issues they had, and they're having to do some improvements to issue debt to fund some improvements for that. So I believe their rate increases are around 4% that they're projecting, and they've been doing rate increases every year that are inflation plus. So, and that plus amount has varied anywhere from a couple percentages points to up to 5% more. So they've been on a path of regular rate increases. And I know Lebanon and Sweet Home both had significant rate increases associated with water treatment improvements and expansions. I don't know what their forecast is, nor do I know in terms of independence, but we could try to get some additional information on the going forward in addition to what the rates are now. But I'll let someone else address the issue about the priority of the capital in evaluating the need.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So a couple of thoughts that I had in there is Deb didn't necessarily mention this, but when we looked at the master plan and the capital projects that are identified in the master plan in the first 5 years, we took some of those projects and moved them farther out into the second 5 years or within the 10 years, but pushed them out a little bit further. And then there were some projects that were in that second 10 years that actually fall off the scale, that we pushed them even further out. Those were projects that I felt, were not, they're important projects. I wouldn't call them critical projects. The projects that are left, especially the ones in the first 5-year window, are what I would deem critical projects. Councillor Carey talked about things that keep him up at night or wake him up at night. The projects that are listed in the first 5-year window are the projects that will keep me up at night thinking about, if we don't get those done, if we have a well failure, then what? And so the big ticket items in the first 5-year window are either well rehab. They may not be described the best in our CIP booklet, but it amounts to 2 of those wells are replacing the Marion County 1 well that is the reason that we were in compliance. It was under the influence of surface water. So we believe that we can drill 2 wells in that area and then come back in and abandon the current well that has a seal failure. The AMR meters, I had talked a little bit about that during the budget process, that is that's our cash register. We need to get those replaced. That'll save staff time, 2 days a month could be reprioritized somewhere else. And then so those are the big ticket items in that first 5-year window.
I guess what I'm saying is looking at that figure 1 projected revenue requirements, revenues, and water fund balance. It's like it kind of seems like buying a crappy car, that it's going to end up costing us more to own this car. I mean, just as everything's going up, and I'm concerned that and Russ, I mean, you're the expert here, and help educate me or help me talk me off the ledge here. It just seems like we're marrying ourselves to this path that's going to keep increasing and increasing, and that 5%, at some point we're going to be looking back, longing for the days of 5% water rate increases because things just appear to be going. I mean, you look at the cost, the jump between 26 and 27 and 27 and 28, we're looking at not quite $1 million, but $750,000 in revenue requirements. And so I'm just, how do we reconcile that with keeping our rate increases reasonable? Does that make sense, or am I just rambling?
If I can add, go ahead, Russ.
Well, and maybe Deb's going to say this. I think the model that Deb has put together that smooths out that increase. Capital, the cost of capital is only going to go up. It's only going to get more expensive. And so Deb has put together a model that, yes, it's a steady, moderate increase over time, but it keeps pace and smooths out that impact.
Right, but the true dollar amount compounds on that. So when we're talking about a 5% increase this year and then a 5.5% increase every year after that, that 5th year 5.5% increase in today's dollars is actually more like 8% or 9%, because we're compounding today's dollars into those rate increases, and that just concerns me. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. I mean, we have to have clean drinking water. We have to have, our sewers have to be running and functioning. I'm just trying to think and talk out loud at the same time. Maybe that's not a good idea, but it is to see that smoothed out revenue, and it's always below our revenue requirements too. So that obviously concerns me as well.
So yeah.
Can I just
I'm gonna
quickly
go ahead-
respond to Byron?
Sure. Laurel, I'm going to go ahead and let Chris speak first. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I don't want to lose what Byron just said.
Yeah, but Chris had a question and maybe he can help illuminate this or.
Yeah, my questions were much along the same line as Byron's questions there. This 5.5% increase in perpetuity it seems to be what we're proposing. I did have a question regarding how that, and I'm looking at the slides right now, interacts with the water bill comparison. What point in time is the proposed amount for the water bill comparison displayed at? Is that at the end of 5 years? Is that at next year? Because these increases don't stop. So where is that comparison falling in time?
That's would be the next year, because we don't know what the other communities are going to increase too, whether they increase every year smoothly like you do and like Salem does, or they're going to, in some communities they'll have a 10% rate increase and then no increase the next year. So without that knowledge, we can only look at the current snapshot and take into account the proposed 5-year or the proposed 5% increase for this next fiscal year. It may well be that July 1, all these other rates go up as well. So, and you don't move a position up in that comparison. So that is one of the hard things with the comparative information, and to get information on the forward looking from the other cities is a bit of an effort, but we can certainly get some of that.
Yeah. As a follow-up regarding the way that the debt service is addressed, I'm assuming that is, through standard loans at the current rate. Is there any room for possibility of interfund transfers that would be less expensive, that would make up some of the gap? I'm looking for places where we have efficiencies.
Yeah, well, so one thing was to look to the urban renewal funds, because that was something that came out of, as Russ said, we did a lot of work looking at the phasing of the improvements and what additional funding could be potentially utilized to take off some of the pressure from the rates. We had the discussion about potentially assuming interfund loans for the second 5-year improvements. However, as Janet said, until we do the sewer rate study, we probably shouldn't assume that that's going to come from the sewer fund again until we know that that's an option. So at this point, I've assumed some kind of standard long-term debt assumptions with respect to interest rate, term, that could come potentially from state loan programs or some other conventional kind of bond market. It's hard to predict interest rates out next year, let alone in 6 or 7 years when those improvements are identified in the master plan. But we've made some assumptions anyway to just see what potential impact that would have.
So I just wanted to add, during this round, so we looked at the Urban Renewal Agency as a participant during the first 5 years. And so that was a kind of a quick response. We still will sit down and go through another exercise of looking at urban renewal participation in other projects. That'll take a little bit more time with me and Russ, but we do want to make sure that that all urban renewal and system development fees that we can apply to these projects that we apply, those will offset the rates, rate increases to some extent, or will reduce the amount that we'll have to borrow for the projects. But I think for this discussion, you should anticipate that the borrowing will be a fairly traditional through the state infrastructure finance authority. Now, when you move towards, I think it was in the second 5-year period, when you move towards debt financing, this will be another conversation you'll have to see if you can mitigate the increases. Maybe it's a combination of the two. But, you know, certainly staff, Russ, myself, Janet, and Deb, we're all looking at various options to try to keep those rates down as much as possible.
And I absolutely appreciate that. Gosh, it's just tough to look at these numbers. I mean, in 5 years, we have a 30% increase over today's rate. In 10 years, we have a 70% increase over today's rate. And it's just tough to look at these numbers.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's also the importance of reviewing these rates, this model regularly over that window in time. We may find that there have been some savings somewhere, or changes in market, or not as much increase in the CIP over that same window in time.
Yeah, a couple things to understand is that it is more expensive to be forced to replace something before you're ready because it fails. So a lot of this infrastructure is there. You can't see it. It's under the ground. And so it's, in terms of the keeping rates lower over the long term, having a thoughtful and prioritized capital plan to address things as they before it gets to an emergency situation is really important. And the other thing to understand is part of that rate increase is just to keep pace with inflation, because a lot of the costs that the utility incurs are going to be going up. So it's not the differential between inflation and the rate increase is that which is needed to fund additional capital improvements, which you currently don't have capacity to do. So it's two pieces. There's that rate increase could be broken out as, in terms of that 5%, about half of that is going to fund inflation, and those costs are going to increase too. And the other half is to start building up that annual revenue ability to fund capital improvements. And that's why you see in cases where the Lebanons and the Sweet Homes and stuff are up about almost double your rates, is because of the need to quickly fund large investments in infrastructure. By ramping up and by going to a mostly cash funded replacement program, you will, on the long term, stay below those other utilities. That's I've experienced that with a number of utilities who have it's hard to get on that path, but once you do, you'll be better off.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That answer is very illuminating and very helpful when coming up to these tough decisions.
Thanks, Chris. And sorry, Laurel, I didn't know we'd go down such a far different path. And do you still have that comment or question?
Yes. Byron talked about the importance of providing clean drinking water for the people who live here in Monmouth and still making it possible for them to afford to pay their water bill. I know when I lived in California, we have periodic droughts there, and a lot of times the municipalities will raise water rates for the specific purpose of encouraging the ratepayers to conserve water. And here in Oregon, it is legal to replumb your house so that your gray water is used to flush your toilet. And I've always thought that it's absolutely criminal to be flushing our toilets with drinking water, particularly as a lot of times we don't know what the future holds for us in terms of the climate and the environment. Have we ever considered looking for grants or funding to help homeowners in Monmouth replumb their house so they could take the water from their shower or their bathtub to flush their toilet?
I have not looked for any grants for that specific purpose.
Okay. And another thing, it seems like the projections here for these increases are based on a rate of inflation that's pretty moderate and similar to what we have right now. But we're all living in uncertain and potentially perilous economic times. If we were to move into a period of either deflation or hyperinflation, how quickly would we be able to move to have the funding to continue to provide clean drinking water for the people in Monmouth?
That's one of the main reasons why you have that reserve policy, so that if we get into a situation where things are changing quickly and you've got some fund balance that you can draw from in a given year, or apply to the next budget year in hopes that things then kind of level out. Yeah, I mean, it's we've crystal ball is only so good, and we can we've run some sensitivity analysis, but it seems like in terms of balancing risk, which is what you have to kind of do in these situations, you don't want to assume the worst and raise rates unnecessarily, but then again, you don't want to assume the best and then keep behind as you are now.
Laurel?
Yes, who's talking?
This is Chad.
Oh, hi, Chad.
Hi. So I was just going to comment on the grants for replumbing. I'm not aware of any grants in my past for that type of project. What I am familiar with are programs to promote the conservation program for users. So it's kind of a double-edged sword where you're trying to encourage the community to conserve their water consumption. That is beneficial in the pressure it puts on the system, as well as your water supply. And I've participated in those programs. Everything, all drops add up to something, but I'm not familiar with grant programs regarding replumbing private property.
Okay, it's a pretty simple process, just getting under the house to do that. You don't, I mean, you've done all this work of anticipating how much repairs and restructuring we're going to need to do and how much that's going to cost. We might just be surprised to find how quickly the people here in Monmouth begin to conserve water, and the money coming in from sales isn't what you thought it was going to be. So I don't know what, I don't have any answers to any of this, but it's a worrisome time in our life.
Yeah.
John, Carrie.
Hi, Deb. Listen, I have a couple questions. One, and to Laurel's comment, it seems that we're building the rate increases on a fairly, a 4.5 average inflationary rate over 10 years. That seems to be pretty high. I don't know. We haven't had that in a while. Am I reading that accurately?
So that's the composite, and what's included in that are a number of different inflation factors applied to different categories of costs. So, for example, just base salary and wages is 3%, as are most materials and services. However, then you've got PERS at 15% every other year. And so that is a big factor in what's driving that as well. And then some of the transfers are based on water sales revenue. So as sales revenue go up, those transfers also go up. And so that 4.5% is based on taking that total and just looking at it year over year. So it does include that additional person. Thanks.
I see that. I was reading the inflation in terms of the overall economic inflation rates that we hear about, from time to time. I understand. Now, I want to go to figure 1, because that's the one that shows, that tracks the revenue increase. Mine is a different color than what was on the slide, which is a fairly standard upward deal. And I know you've got that calculated, the rate increases calculated in there. One of the things that I'm wondering about is you've got the capital projects all sort of stacked up, along the way. Of the 8 million, there's about nearly 2 million of those are non-rate related. They're either urban renewal or they're system development charges. So I'm wondering if that's an accurate reflection of the capital expenses vis-a-vis water revenue.
So this chart here doesn't include the systems development charges that are applied. So this is just coming from water fund capital, and wouldn't include the debt service either, because that's the or the debt proceeds. So it's just meant to show what is the capital that's being funded out of rates, cash funded from rates, and from fund balance in over the 10-year period. So the CIP that I showed in the presentation, which isn't in your memo, that shows the total capital. This just shows what ends up in the coming out of the rates and the reserves.
Unclear in the memo. And then you were talking about it, my sound went out for a while, so perhaps this is when you touched on that. I'm still not clear why the precipitous drop in the fund balance, between 25, 26 and 29, 30, with the rate increases and all of that that's going on. It doesn't, everything else seems to be that seems to be out of the ordinary.
That's related to the fact that the expenditures in the, whenever that bar, that whatever color graph you're looking at in the memo, I think it's like kind of a reddish orange bar, is below the line, the reddish orange line is below the bars, the stacked bars, then you're drawing down fund balance, and you're doing that consecutively over a few years, and that's why that line is going down.
Okay, yeah, it seems a bit disproportionate, but graphs can be a little bit misleading. The other thing, and I think this is, well, not necessarily to you, Deb, but to the rest of us, a lot of this is based on a draft master plan. And we've not seen that yet. And while it may or may not be ours to approve or otherwise, we'll have a chance to comment on what that master plan looks like, which is driving the capital improvement projects here. Because it's my understanding that we've not seen that yet. Is that correct, Russ?
Yeah, thank you, John. That's a great point. So I have the consultant notified me that I will have a final draft probably early June, and Chad and I will get that in front of you hopefully in June for your review and acceptance or adoption. So you'll have a chance to look at that pretty soon.
And I think that at that point, I mean, I think we've got a clear need on the near horizon, but I think then we'll have a chance to have some of the discussions that we've been having, you know, over that 10-year horizon. Once we get an actual look at, you know, what the master plan ultimately looks like. Because right now we're just sort of looking at numbers on a list and titles on a list. And they're legitimate, I'm certain, but we can drill down on these at another time.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? I think basically what we keep thinking over and over again, I mean, what we keep reminding ourselves is whether it's the actual investments in our system or whether it is the money we are putting aside to be able to cover those investments, somebody kicked this can to us and we have the option to continue to kick one or the other or bite it and be the bad guys, right? Somebody has to do that eventually. And I always look at these discussions as the tipping point of when four of us decide that it's time to be the bad guys to keep somebody else from doing that. But that's kind of where these conversations always end up. They are tough decisions, but things don't get cheaper and there's never a magic pot of money to be able to fund them. So.
And I'll just tell you this. So when the city of Carlton went through the same process, and while it's a smaller city, their capital improvement plan was very comparable to what Monmouth is looking at. And they had the same discussion and said the same thing that the mayor just said, which is these projects and the related rate increases get pushed down the road. What I kept reminding the council is in 25 or 50 years, you guys will be looked at as heroes. Somebody's got to bite the bullet and be willing to incur the costs to maintain your system. And, you know, so Carlton went through it. I remember when St. Helens was doing 25% a year over year, especially if you're doing any large capital improvements like a water treatment plant, large reservoirs and those type of things. And you don't have a watershed to help subsidize your capital improvements like some cities do. So, you know, while you can try to squeeze, and I certainly can appreciate and understand it, but the fact is that, you know, with your water and sewer programs, it's just kind of, to some extent, it is what it is. And over time, you have to replace the pipes that are in the line, the water supply, the reservoirs, and things like that. And so, and there's a cost. And like what Russ said earlier, the costs are going up for the construction year over year. So at least over the past few years, I think that number has been anywhere from 5 to 7, 8% for capital construction projects. So the sooner you can do it, the better off you're going to be in the long run. Now, but staff will work hard to mitigate those increases year to year. We understand.
There's our slogan. Hey, it's not 25% a year.
It could be worse.
It could be worse.
This is what Olson says all the time. It could be worse.
So actually, I've been to Sweet Home's water treatment plant. I've actually had a tour of it, and it is astoundingly amazing. But it was a very expensive, and that is exactly what happened to them. So, any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so much, Deb, and thank you for your patience with our technology. We really, really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
we will be back on this.
Do you have a target for the final report?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, please. Do you have a target date for the final report?
Oh, well, if we're, we can circle back and just, if there aren't any number changes, that's an easy thing to produce.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
We will now move to back into the order of business on the consent calendar tonight. We have 2 items. We had a regular council meeting back on April 21st, and we had a special meeting on April 28th. And I don't know about you guys, but those seem like 6 months ago to me. But I did review the minutes, and if others did, and I would entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar as approved, as submitted.
So moved.
I heard John and Chris's cat on that, but we'll give that one to John Kerry and Byron.
I'll second.
That was a second from you. So moved by John Kerry, seconded by Byron. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? I guess I should just ask that. Thank you very much. We move into reports, and I have been obviously pretty still involved and engaged with a lot of regular reports and updates and meetings regarding our COVID-19 situation. The weekly call with the League of Oregon Cities continues to be very valuable. We get a weekly report that includes not only statewide issues, someone from the governor's office, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Oregon Department of Emergency Management, but also on the national level. And that includes our lobbyists and advocates at the national level. But we've had a lot of great information there. I continue to meet twice a week with our local leadership group, and we are continuing to collaborate. We've got some new video things coming out week before last, I think. We actually had Commissioner Pope join us at that meeting to talk through the situation where Polk County was going. That was prior to them submitting their plan to the Oregon Health Authority, which, as we all know, happened last week. And Polk County was the only, Marion and Polk were the only 2 counties to submit who were just basically denied. There were 3 other counties that submitted and got theirs sort of approved later in the day, Friday. Apparently on a Mid-Willamette Valley call today, Commissioner Pope indicated that the commission had done their work. They had been working with the Oregon Health Authority and the governor's office, and they had given their interpretation of the data that is being used to decide about whether or not Polk County reopens. That the commissioner felt that their interpretation of the data would be accepted, and that hopefully this Thursday Polk County will be given the go-ahead to go to phase 1. So I don't know any more detail than that, but that is our commissioner's take on it as of this afternoon. So we may be in a situation by this weekend where we'll be enjoying some of those same things. I know a lot of our business owners have been preparing and taking the necessary precautions to be able to reopen safely, and we'll want to support them however we can with that. But there's still a lot of difficulty ahead, and a lot of decisions that have to be made, and a lot of accommodations, and we're continuing to be able to work through those. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I appreciate everybody's hard work on the budget. It was staff particularly, but for all of you. And I know I kind of skipped out on one meeting, but I made up for it last night because I had my own school district budget meeting that took quite a while. So I really appreciate that. I mean, it is a lot of thoughtful questions, a lot of considerations, and being able to really work through those is important. Just hope we can tighten it up in the future so it doesn't take quite as much time of our volunteers and staff, but appreciate your work on that. That's all I have. Boards and commissions, I think, didn't we have a planning commission meeting? Councillor Carey will speak to us on that.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the Planning Commission has not met, but will meet tomorrow. Since we talked last, and in the minutes, and it wasn't worth it editing, but there are 3 new design reviews that are working through the pipeline at Ash Creek Station. That wasn't clear in the minutes, but not substantive. So we've got 3 more coming there. But tomorrow night, there are 2 design reviews that are going to be considered. One for the Ron Wilson Center. Recall the new building they'd like to build at Clay and Monmouth and the extension of the Main Street District, if you'll recall that. And then the other one is a fairly exciting development for the lot across from City Hall, currently where the food carts are. There's a design plan being submitted for a 4-story multi-use facility there, commercial on the ground floor, 3 residential floors above that. So that's pretty exciting that something is moving there. Not sure how much, whether it's going to get legs and go all the way through or not, but we'll find that out, I guess. But anyway, that's on tap for tomorrow night. And again, I'm not sure whether I'll be attending that or not, depending on the nature of the of what it is. But just so you all know, that is coming down the pipeline. And that is it for me.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Carey. Has anybody else heard anything? I think our city manager will give a report about the libraries, kind of what they're working towards, but Roxanne?
I'm not sure if I've reported on this or not because it's been quite a while ago, but I think you all know I go to the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. I'm on the board of directors, and the decision was made, I think, a month and a half ago to postpone even looking for a search firm to then help us find a new executive director for the COG. And so we have the RFP ready to go, but just knowing obviously what everybody's going through right now, the decision's been made to not even look for an executive search firm yet. I will keep you up to date when they are ready. Renata Whaley has been great as the interim, and she will stay interim with the support of the COG staff. So there you go.
Yes, and Councillor Lopez, if you can share, while you share, I know you shared a little bit about the MyNet reopening plan. Hopefully you'll share that with us.
Yes, happy to. MyNet has created a reopening plan that we will be following once Polk County does enter phase 1 of reopening. In summary, and so this plan is fairly robust. It's 20+ pages long. And in summary, it is following all best practices recommended by state and national health authorities, as well as governor's guidelines regarding distancing and PPE use. we will be doing everything that we can to minimize or outright stop any personal personal contact or any entering of other people's spaces. There will be a considerable amount of remote work continuing. Anything that can be done remotely will be done remotely. And what this does mean, though, is it does mean that we will be able to begin installs again. And our technicians will be allowed to go to people's properties, and as long as they, within their own judgment, are able to perform that install while still maintaining social distancing and wearing the appropriate PPE, they will be able to perform that install. So we'll start seeing that begin again, which is excellent. Not only for the budgetary matter, but getting those customers access to internet that they need, more direly now than ever. So it's good to see that moving forward in a really positive manner, and my caps off to the whole MyNet team that has weathered through this with all of us. I also do want to call out that there is a MyNet budget MyNet budget meeting tomorrow afternoon. I need to double check the time. I believe it's at 2 p.m. And we'll be holding that remotely as well as for right now, all future scheduled board of directors meetings will be held remotely also. And my apologies, 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, 1 to 4:30.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, Chris. That is great news. I reviewed that plan, and boy, it's extensive, but is a great pathway for the kind of work that they need to do to go into people's spaces. Interestingly, there is some talk. The local Monmouth Independence Community Foundation was exploring at a recent meeting the potential of maybe funding internet access for some of the homes that don't have it. Some of them have equipment installed, but those that don't, once we can install equipment, potentially we could find some funding sources to help students and families get internet access in the community through philanthropic means. So that's great that they would be able to resume that.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Mayor. I would like to call out the Lifeline program, which is something that MyNet began taking part in at the beginning of this year. It feels like ages ago, but essentially what this program does is it allows for a reduced rate for individuals or families who are at need and can demonstrate need, and this is through qualifying for other pre-existing assistance programs. And the rate for internet and home phone bundled, I think the Lifeline program brings that bundled rate down to $10 a month, if or thereabouts. I can present those exact figures at the next meeting.
All right, unless there's anything else, Darren.
I'm thinking that the MyNet Budget Committee meeting is actually Thursday, Chris. You might want to confirm that, but I was thinking it was Thursday rather than Wednesday.
Darren, thank you very much. Yes, this is a case of the days blending together. It is not tomorrow, it is Thursday. Absolutely correct.
Excellent. Thanks. All right. So if there's nothing else, we will hear from the interim city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. First, I just want to say thank you to Janet, our finance director, and all of the department heads for the work that they did putting the budget together and coming in and making their presentations. They really did a stellar job with that. We will have the approved budget up to the city council at the June 2nd meeting, and currently we're working on some improvements to the budget narratives. So listening to some of the conversations and looking at the budget preparation in real time, and we were handicapped, of course, with the COVID-19 and putting it together, but Janet and I are working on some improvements to the budget narratives. I think that would provide more information specific to each department. So, for example, with the capital projects, you wouldn't have to pivot between two different areas of the budget to see what's there, and you'll see revenue highlights and expenditure highlights and different things like that. So, but your department heads did a great job putting it together, and I think with COVID, we were working under some handicaps this year to get that out to you. And before I talk about the COVID, I just wanted to say that today we had a virtual meeting with FFA regarding the City Hall project. We are working through that. I think they said that there's a week or two before we'll have the cost estimates. Right now we're using a placeholder number of about $7.5 million. You did see in the budget, we are working to move some money over to your special reserve fund to help offset some of the costs that you would have to do in terms of a general obligation bond. So once we get through the budget, you know, we will circle back and talk about those requested or recommended reserves towards that project. I mean, in my mind, in order to buy down future costs, you need to start setting aside reserves now. I wish that the city of Monmouth had started doing that 5 years ago, but you know, right now we're looking at a 2 years program to put aside about $2 million towards that project, plus the Urban Renewal Agency will contribute fairly significantly. So, but we'll have more discussion about that later. As the mayor mentioned, so COVID-19, that's really what I was going to talk about. Now, a week ago when I was putting the memo together, I thought we would be open at least sometime this week. We knew that the Polk County was turning in their application. At the time, I thought that they would be approved. We were going to probably look at some partial reopening as of today or tomorrow, sometime during the week. Kind of in short, what I've decided to do is defer that for until next week. I will take it for granted that Polk County will resubmit their application and get it approved. And so we will have a slow opening beginning after Memorial Day. So next Tuesday, for example, City Hall will open for limited hours from 10 to 1. Now, as
we have sneeze guards.
Yeah, well, yeah, Janet pointed out, as long as we have our sneeze guards, so each of the lobby areas are going to install some sneeze guards, and we'll have some limited openings. So nothing's going back to normal right away. So City Hall, for example, it would be 10 to 1 o'clock with some meetings by, you could call and make appointments outside of those hours. The library will not, they're going to do a really slow opening where they will open their drop-off box so that they can collect the books, set them aside for 72 hours. Then they'll open up for pickups. So customers can come drive up and a staff person will deliver them to their cars. And then they'll be looking to open up with limited capacity. So, you know, whatever can fit within appropriate 6-foot distancing and circulation under the roof. So actually the library will be a little bit slower opening up. Public Works will not move back into they won't open up until the remodel job is finished, and that probably won't be through the end of this month, and the first week in June is what I'm thinking. So each of the departments have submitted a reopening plan. I do have those. We'll be finishing those up this week and then look at some type of slow opening next week. And of course, I'll send something out to the council so you will have all of that in it before we release it to the public. And we'll use everything at our disposal to let the public know what that looks like.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
What are we talking about as far as face coverings for either staff or the public?
So the public would be required to wear a face mask if they enter city facilities. The city staff will be required to wear face masks as well when they're dealing with the public. So right now we'll probably still have some staggered staffing situations because workstations are actually too close together, at least at City Hall. So we will be requiring face masks to go with the sneeze guards, so the shields. And Janet and I are kind of wrestling over if people will be wearing, staff will be wearing gloves, at least while they're interacting with the public.
Hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer.
Yeah, well, that's of course.
Cash and the.
Yeah, cash.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. You kind of go all in, and so yes, I do agree with the sanitizer, but you know, it's assuming that everybody follows the proper protocols. Without a vaccine, I'm one of those people that until a vaccine is on the market, you're going to be exposed to the COVID-19 anytime you come into contact with anybody under any conditions. And 6 feet is, you know, if you can maintain 6 feet. So the best we can do is just try to mitigate that. So I'm probably, in this case, I'm a little bit more conservative to ensuring that, you know, because I don't want to see any staff or the public get sick because we tried to open too quickly. The COVID-19 community response team that the mayor mentioned earlier has just been a great resource to the two communities, school district, fire district, and the Western University. And so I am being very sensitive to being probably overly cautious. Somebody started to call me by my mom's name, so, you know. I don't respond to Nancy generally, but I understand what you're saying. So are there any questions anybody has regarding the opening, the slow openings that we'll be looking at? Okay, great. The only other thing I wanted to mention is, and you will be talking about this, is Business Oregon, the grant program that they have. I'd like to compliment Suzanne for the work that she's done with the City of Independence, putting this joint application together. Both city manager and Independence, I talked about it. We believe we have, it certainly strengthens our applications going in together. So, and while they have a little bit more resources to put at it, we're proposing $60,000 as the city's share, which would be used as a loan, and the state, if we are successful during this first phase of applications, those would be used as grants. So certainly it's consistent with the intent of the Economic Development Loan Fund. And we're pretty excited about the ability to use those dollars in the match that we can get through Business Oregon. That's all I have, of course, unless there are questions.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions for Chad about that, and as he said, we've got a couple of things we'll talk a little bit more coming up. But our first of all, Phyllis, do we have any citizen comments?
No.
Thank you. There's no one here in the room with us, so we will move on to the business agenda. And our first order of business is to approve an OLCC license. And that would be a new one for us for Ross Family Market. And I thought I saw Lieutenant Haynes on with us this evening to present that to us. Isaiah, go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes, tonight I have a staff report for the liquor license application for the new Roths. And as you all know, Roths, currently in Independence, will be moving to Monmouth at 1517 Monmouth Independence Highway, right there in the S-curves. And this is really a pretty simple, I guess, application. Most things remain the same, as in that you'll be able to go to Roth's and buy beer, wine, and cider as you normally would. This application also includes limited on-premises sales, and that is because of the addition in the new Roth's of a growler station or growler bar and a seating area. And I kind of outlined some of that in this staff report, just some bullet points about the growler stations. I hadn't been to one of the Roths, so this was new for me that has one of these, but West Salem, I guess, is probably the closest or nearest outlet that has this in there to check out. But with the new growler station, patrons will be able to purchase beer, wine, cider, and they'll get that filled up in a growler, either in a 32 ounce or 64 ounce, and they will be able to take that off-site, take it home. You can buy the growlers right there at Roth's, or if you have your own, you can take it in there. They'll sanitize it and fill it. They'll have various I guess, things on tap there to try. And so patrons that are doing a growler fill can do 3 1-ounce tasters to kind of see what they want to purchase. They will also have root beer for kids and adults. Some of the rules for when you're in there, once you get your growler filled, they will seal it with tape just to show that you're not going to be drinking out in the store there. And they'll have different colored bands on it indicating if it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic. And patrons can also, because they've got that seating area in there, patrons will be able to actually just purchase a pint and drink it there, or however many pints I guess they want, so long as they're not get too excited and have too many there. But that will be allowed there, and really just general OLCC rules, regulations apply. Part of the background that I do, I look at the police records management system, and I look for calls for service in relation to the sale of alcohol or any violations that an establishment may have had. And this last year, Ross didn't have any. In fact, for the past several years, Ross has not had any. So they do a good job. They have an independence. We think that's obviously going to be the same here in Monmouth. Tonight, you guys have the option to make a recommendation to OLCC in favor of approving a liquor license. You can make a recommendation to OLCC against the approval of a liquor license, or you can make no recommendation at all. And with that, I'll open it up if you guys have any questions of me.
John, did you have a question? He was waving his plan.
No question, just a comment. The growler fill is a wonderful addition to our community. As a frequenter of the West Salem store, we'll all appreciate it right here in River City.
Thank you. And that, I guess that was my question, Lieutenant, when you said you did the check of records, would that cover not only Independence, which doesn't currently have the service, but West Salem or, whichever other stores, Vista or whichever others have in-store consumption?
No, really the way I looked at it is I looked at our local store. So even though this is different, I did not reach out to the other communities, some of which have it. But I think by and large we'll have a lot of the same employees here. And I had a sergeant go down there, and he actually got a tour of the new store, and he spoke to the general manager, and everything seems to be on par and above board, and they've done a good job. And I think they're pretty receptive and very keen on the rules and regulations that they have to apply by. So, but to answer your question, they did. I did not look at other stores. I just looked at our local store.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think you're right. I mean, obviously that's the clientele and the staffing rather than the sales model, but and I haven't heard of a lot of great stories coming out of problems with Roths, so I think we're good.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on this? And otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
I
I
move
move.
send OLCC a recommendation in favor of approving a liquor license for Roth's Fresh Market.
And I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Lopez for the motion and Councillor Belts for the second. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 I think I got all of you. Any opposed? All right, motion carries, and we will send that off to the OLCC, which wouldn't have cared what we said or didn't say, and they're going to make their own decision, but it's sure nice to be able to say that our new purveyor has our unanimous support. So we have another item of business here. Again, it seems like about 6 months ago, we were barreling towards a decision to hire a new city manager, and that decision was abruptly, in a way, taken away from us, I guess. We were able to make the decision to put our search for a city manager on pause, only because at the last minute, Chad Olson swooped in and decided that he would save us by graciously offering to continue with us. I don't know if going through the budget process made him regret that, but it's almost too late now because I do have in front of us an amendment to his employment agreement, and Lane was kind enough to draft this up for us, basically hoping that now that the worst of the crisis is over and budget season's over, that we can continue to carry on the work we're doing with Chad having some time off. And so this contract takes the salary and the other considerations, which were a mileage reimbursement and a cell phone allowance, and prorates those so that we would pay 3/5 of each of those. And that would begin June 1st of 2020 and would carry on until we think things are settled down enough and able to move forward with a permanent replacement. I believe you have a copy of that agreement. So if there are any questions about it, we'll take those. Otherwise, John.
Well, the only question I have is it open-ended, or do we have a horizon on that? Does Chad have a horizon on that? I mean, the way you laid it out, it could be quite a long deal.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor Carey, the horizon was about 4 weeks ago.
I heard him say once, I heard him say he'd be here through December 31st if we needed him, so.
This amendment is an amendment to the original interim city manager contract. That doesn't have an end date on it, so this doesn't impose one. It just continues until he's ready to leave or you're ready to hire somebody else.
Sorry.
Not that funny.
So, any other questions? Otherwise, get a motion on the damn floor, get it seconded, let's vote on, I can sign this before he changes his mind. Counselor Sharma.
Can I just say thank you to Chad for your willingness to do this? I know how hard it is to put retirement aside.
Farmer, I appreciate that.
I move to adopt the attached amendment to interim city manager pro tem employment agreement.
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Schinkel for the motion and Counselor Lopez for the second and everybody else for waving at us for that. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sign it.
Aye.
And Chad.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think I muted the motion.
All right, I hear no opposition to that. So again, I'm going to take a brief moment while we talk about emergency business assistance plan with Ms. Duffner while I sign this and make Chad sign it before he changes his mind. Thank you.
Yes, great. Yes, please sign that quickly. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm here tonight to present the staff report for the COVID-19 Emergency Business Assistance Program that we, the city, are trying to roll out here to be able to help our businesses that have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We had the opportunity to jump on some funding assistance that Business Oregon announced just about 2 weeks ago. That's how fast everything is flying. The applications for the grant were due actually Monday, the 18th. So we're actually asking, the city staff are asking to ratify the use of our economic loan funds that would be match for the Business Oregon funds that we have applied for. The Business Oregon funds, the state came out with $10 million. They're going to parcel into 3 different phases. So right now we're on the first phase of $2.5 million in funding, and it's geared towards cities that have existing or can stand up a loan program quickly, because these funds are supposed to be out in the first phase by the end of June. So pretty tight timeline. It's a 1-to-1 match. So whatever funds the city puts in, the state will match that 50%. As Chad mentioned, we applied for $60,000 out of our current fund, which I believe is just around $65,000. And if we're successful, then we would obviously be able to match that with state funds of $60,000. We did go in as a co-applicant with the City of Independence. It did appear that the applications would be stronger if we work together on those. So we are going in with the City of Independence, but there's opportunity to partner with the COG. Certainly we'll have the COG help us with the loan processing portion of making the loans. 50% of the loan amount would be in the form of a forgivable loan, so a grant to the business. The state had some pretty strict guidelines on who would be eligible for the funding. They're really trying to target businesses that haven't already received some kind of federal disaster funding. So whether it's through SBA's emergency loan program or the payroll protection program, it's very popular. They're trying to get the businesses that may have slipped through the cracks, especially sole proprietors and disadvantaged businesses, women, minority-owned businesses. So we'll be targeting. We do have to. All money comes with strings, right? So if we want to play, we have to play by their rules. The other guidelines that are outlined in that staff report before you, these are targeted to small businesses defined as 25 or fewer employees. They also are targeted towards businesses that either had to shut down as a result of the emergency order, or they've seen a net decline in their profits for the months of March and April. Nonprofits can actually be eligible for these funds as well. And as I mentioned, these are for businesses that haven't already received some kind of federal funding. So it'll be interesting. We have, like City of Independence, we've sent out a survey to our local businesses. We're starting to get some feedback from that. And actually just over half of the survey responses have actually received some sort of federal funding. The payroll protection program seems to be the most popular one that people were able to be successful with. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the demand is. There certainly were some survey respondents that haven't received any funding, and that some of them indicated that they don't want to apply for any loan funding, was not attractive to them. So hopefully we'll be able to still pick up some folks that have slipped through the cracks. In terms of what the funds can be used for, pretty broad in business-related operating expenses. So this can be rent, payroll, and purchasing. So it's broadly defined to try to get in there and get them going to be able to reopen as part of phase one. As I mentioned, the funds are targeting 50% of sole proprietors and the disadvantaged population groups. So we'll have the applications translated into Spanish, and we'll be doing some targeted outreach to disadvantaged population groups before the formal announcements made. I outlined some of the alternatives and direct staff to utilize the funding in our Economic Development Loan Fund program to establish this business assistance program that'll leverage a business organs funding. If we're successful, we should find out about that by the end of the week. Second alternative, you could say, you know, the strings are not worth it. And the leveraging is not as important to us. We're really wanting to go on our own. So that would be a second alternative, is to develop our own loan or grant program to assist our businesses. And then the third option, of course, is that we can, you know, do nothing. We can actually refuse if we were to get funding from a business organ that we didn't want to participate. So financial implications, as I mentioned, we have $65,000 in the fund. This would be for up to $60,000 in funding. If we are not able to get all those funds out the door, then, you know, we simply have to give the monies back to Business Oregon, unless there's some kind of extension granted, which they haven't indicated at this point. But they're kind of writing the rules as they go. So there are some details that we will learn more about as we go through this. So yeah, I attached a copy of the Business Oregon's announcement for the request for funding proposals. There's a sample motion on the staff report, and be happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
Just before the questions go, may I just add one other point to the financial implications, is that we will, if this is approved, we will have to do a supplemental budget at a future meeting for 1920 in order to, because we haven't appropriated $60,000 to do the match. But I can bring that forward, and it's not an issue. I just need to notice a supplemental budget and have you guys approve a supplemental budget. Sorry.
And we could adopt a budget different than what the budget committee approved, but that 60,000 would be more than 10% of the.
This would be for 1920.
Of that fund.
Would be the understanding.
Oh, we're going to be able to spend it before then. Okay, great.
For 1920.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. And I just wanted a couple quick questions. Suzanne, could you talk a little bit about the outreach that is being done? I understand the survey was sent out, but are those the usual suspects? Are we reaching out to maybe home-based businesses like childcare and things? Are we looking mostly at restaurant, retail, personal services kind of folks? What's the outreach like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Chad forwarded a copy of the grant proposal that was submitted to Business Oregon, and it has a whole list of tasks and timelines associated with the marketing and outreach for the grant program. So it's a really comprehensive approach. It does include, as you had mentioned, Mayor, outreach to home occupations, minority, women-owned businesses. There's, of course, blasts through email listservs. The chamber offered to help getting the word out as well through the Monmouth Business Association and the Independence Downtown Association. I imagine with this quick turnaround, there'll be some specific outreach to folks that we know of through the survey that are eligible. I mean, I've been talking to some businesses that are still open for takeout to find out kind of which programs, if they've been successful. So I have a little bit of knowledge in that area, but certainly could use all hands on deck of help of getting the word out, just ensure normal ways that we promote things through Facebook and the website and our email listserv. So, and then, hopefully also word of mouth will get it out there as well. But yeah, Janet was right. We have to have spent these funds, but in this fiscal year. So there'll be a kind of a full effort as soon as we get word of the funding for it. If you have any other ideas, we'd certainly be open to those ideas as well.
Yeah, I think it's just important. We always think of the Main Street type businesses, and we have a lot of other businesses that are suffering. We want to make sure that those folks who aren't always connected in things like MBA and IDA also hear about this. So I think that'll be all of our job to get the word out if we go forward with this. Questions? Chris, did you have something?
Thank you, and I really appreciate the city acting in this direction to help our local business community. You did mention that this would be a joint application with Independence. Could you expand a little bit upon how that would work in a joint fashion?
Sure, that's a great question. So just to clarify, we had to submit the application yesterday, so we've actually already had to apply for it by the deadline. But Independence is listed as the fiscal agent, right? Because you had to have one primary applicant, and so we're basically the co-applicants, the city of Monmouth, and then we've identified the COG Small Business Lending Program as our loan processing service provider for the project. So in terms of more like the detailed logistics of how the funds would get awarded, so the city still holds, our pot of money. It's not commingled with Independence's. So as COG loan officer reviews an application and the city has reviewed the application and deemed that it meets the criteria, then there would be a request to our city finance department for Monmouth loans to cut the check to the individual. So, and then the payback would come back to city of Monmouth if it was a Monmouth loan. If it was Independence, it would go back to Independence. So, and that way, our funds again would be commingled. There will be closeout reporting requirements. One of the good, I think, silver linings about the pandemic is that we're learning to work together closely with our partners. And so I've been working with Sean Irvine, Economic Development Director, and Independence pretty closely these last couple of months, and we've developed a good partnership and been able to tag team. Certainly he has a lot of grant experience and successfully completing projects, and so I'm confident that we will meet those Business Oregon requirements and that we'll be able to divvy up that workload as needed to make sure that we're, and the goal here is to try to get more funding assistance out to our businesses.
Byron?
Thank you. Suzanne, just a clarifying question. So it says funding will be made available to eligible businesses on a first come, first served basis in the form of a loan, 50% of which will be issued as a grant. So does that mean 50% right out of the gate is a gift, if you will, and then they'll qualify for the other 50% to be forgiven? Is that how that works? Or will they be required to pay back 50% of whatever they get?
They will be required to pay back 50% of what they give. So let's use a numbers example, right? So if I apply for a $10,000 loan, assuming my business meets the criteria, then I would get that loan award, and then I'd only have to pay back 5,000 of the loan.
Okay.
Is that
and I assume the half they pay back will be the ones that the half that we lent them, right?
Yes.
Okay. and then secondly, so I'm looking at the document, the RFP from Business Oregon. Now, are we required to follow this, or is this sort of the floor of requirements, and we can add requirements if we need to? For example, what comes to mind is a business who takes the money and then doesn't actually reopen. How do we safeguard against that? I didn't. It might be in there somewhere, but I didn't really see that as a requirement of qualifying for this loan or getting the grant money.
Yeah. Well, first off the bat, you got to understand we're going to lose some money on this. Not all the businesses will. I mean, we hope that we'll get 100% payback, but the reality is these are bad economic times, and so by partnering with COG to do the loan review services, so they will be looking at some basic financials for the borrower, and trying to check the boxes. And COG has a lot of years of experience of working with borrowers and trying to make good loans, so that we're using these funds responsibly, with understanding that it's a loan that needs to be paid back. There will be some grace period, initially 6 months, no interest or payments required to help the businesses get back on their feet and get the cash flows coming back in, hopefully. But your initial question of can we put more restrictions on the Business Oregon requirements, I guess I'd have to hear what your ideas were for that. There was a kind of a Q&A session with Business Oregon's staff and people interested in applying for this, and there were a lot of questions asked, a lot of different ways. Can we limit it to 5 businesses that only have 5 employees? And the answer was no. You need to play by the framework that they've set up. But I think your second point was just the fiscal responsibility of managing these, so by having we're not doing them as grants that don't get paid back. So we are having that kind of added review of the loan program to make sure that these are as sound of borrowers as we can, without setting that bar so unreasonably high that we can't get the money out. So again, there's always going to be some risk, and if these are the borrowers, or these are the businesses that didn't apply for the federal loans already, there's some inherent risk that that it may be challenging. But I think it's important than not doing anything at all, right, for lending out the funds.
John?
A couple quick clarifiers. I noticed in the application the joint application we put in, there was a lot of discussion about outreach to particularly Hispanic-owned businesses, and a lot of there was a considerable discussion about Ramon Martinez. Now, will he be reaching out to Hispanic-owned in Monmouth businesses as well?
That's a good question. We didn't have that specific question asked, but I think that there's a lot of back and forth between our two communities and business owners knowing each other. So, I certainly will try to take advantage of Ramon's network, so the extensive network, and build on that, as much as we can. Yeah, that some of the details of who does what are still kind of to be worked out. We had a pretty short deadline to get this turned in, and I'm certainly committing as much as my time as I can, juggling all the other balls that are up in the air. But Independence has been a good partner, and I think that they want to see, since we're both joined as co-applicants, they want to see us be successful, and provided they have kind of the capacity to help us, I believe that they will, without committing them to hours and hours of work, which I can't.
One of the things I noticed two things I noticed in the application that we had, it was pretty explicit that applicants could have received other grants or loans. It didn't specify federal grants or loans, but it said that they are, and it was underlined, eligible for these if they had received other grants or loans. So that sounds a little different than what you were saying.
Where were you reading that, John? I'm not sure that I'm tracking.
I'll go offline here. It's on the first page, and it says businesses that have received other loans or grants are underlined eligible for this loan program. This is under the list of businesses must.
Yeah, so you're looking at the application that Monmouth and Independence turned into Business Oregon, correct? The one that starts, with the introduction. Okay, so good clarification, and that's probably a little confusing. Independence has already established a loan program before this announcement came out. So, but it's been really recently, and I think they've only had like 3 or 4 applications maybe that have come in. So what they were trying to communicate there is that of those applications that they've received for loans, those may be eligible but they still have to meet Business Oregon's criteria. So they are self-certifying as a business, but they have to say that they haven't received any of the small business loans or the payroll protection program. So Independence saying they will, if the business doesn't meet Business Oregon's criteria, they're still going to make the loan, but they're not going to be able to count that as their match.
I would be concerned that Business Oregon might read that and say this is contrary to what our guidelines are, and be less likely to act on it. I don't know.
Let's hope not. Yeah. I can see where it maybe that could be.
The other thing relative to that application, and again, this is the one that concerns me a little bit because of the timing. The application that goes forward said this would, businesses must be open and basically operational by the end of May. And I'm not sure when Polk County is going to open up.
Again, John, where are you reading that, or what? The same place?
Basically the same place. It's,
Oh, okay. Opening significance. So the third bullet, I think, is where this is. Oh, okay. So yeah, the context of that section, again, Independence was just explaining what their current loan program requirements were before Business Oregon came out with this announcement. They did go on to say that the next page, top of the page, is proposed program adjustments. So they recognize their Business Oregon, this is what we're going to do to change to make sure that the loans going forward meet the criteria and can be counted as matched. So that they were simply stating, hey, we have a program, because that was part of the Business Oregon. They want to work with cities that already have loan programs or can roll these up really quickly, because again, the point is to get the funds out by June 30th. So yeah, so the context around that bullet is that, again, Independence was just explaining we have now, and they recognize in that next page what they need to do to adjust it.
Yeah. Hey, John. So, John, this is Chad. And just to piggyback on that, so because Independence had a program that they had already approved, they had $200,000 that they put out, and they peeled off $100,000 to apply to this program. So if you read through it, you will see what appears to be some conflict, but what they're doing is they're also saying that they're amending the program that they had already put out and made available. And they did have 4 applicants, I think, that stepped in. I'm not sure what they're going to do with the 4 that had already made applications. But in the context of the application, they're also saying that they're pivoting back over towards what Business Oregon is wanting to do. So there appears to be a little bit of conflict there, but really what they're saying is that they are going to amend their program to match up with the Business Oregon program.
I'm confident that we would get it worked out in the end. I'm just hoping it doesn't make the application problematic in the eyes of Business Oregon. And then the last question that I have, and I'll shut up. In ours, we're making this available to nonprofit 501c3 organizations. What are some examples of those that might apply?
So I believe isn't the Montessori school, I don't know if they're a 501c3, but I understood they were not for profit. So that the Business Oregon guidelines are very clear that it has to be a 501c3.
I think PPL would be another one that would qualify.
True. And Ron Wilson, maybe? I'm not sure. Chamber, it could, if they have the 501c3 staff.
The chamber, did she say?
Chamber's a 501c6, I think.
Oh, are they? Okay. So, yeah, not
501c6.
Yeah, not chamber, but the food bank, things like that would be obviously more visible in our community. We don't have a lot of super visible 501c3s, but we do have them, and certainly many of them could have been affected. So other questions for Suzanne? Roxanne.
Is the Council of Governments charging for the service of managing the small business loans?
Yes, they have a loan processing fee. I believe it's 1.5%, but need to confirm that. So we will have an agreement with COG, I don't know if it's an MOU, but they're an ORS 190. So we would need to enter an agreement, Independence, Monmouth, and COG, that spells out specifically what those terms are and what services are being provided. But I think their standard loan processing fee is 1.5%.
And Independence, as mentioned, had their plan already set up, and they are running their loan program through the COG already. That was their intention before doing this. And a reminder that if we don't get the matching grant from the state, we can still roll out our program. We can still make this our
Absolutely.
little portion available to our businesses if that joint application with Independence is not granted. It just, it loosens the strings. It does away with the matching grant, but it's still something now we would be set up to put in place and move forward with if we choose.
Plus the fact that, Business Oregon, they put $10 million in towards the program. There's two phases. First phase is $2.5 million. Second phase is 2.5. And then there's a $5 million after that. So if it weren't approved during the first round,
Right.
there may be an opportunity for round two, or as the mayor said, we can recircle back and take a look at administering some type of program ourselves without going back through the application.
So it does come with risk, absolutely. That's being in the loan business sucks. I can tell you, not only as a former banker, but I grew up with my father who was in the personal loan business, and he was also the repo man. So I used to play, accordions he picked up when he was trying to sweep for loans. And it is a risky business, but something that we do have that money sitting there, and as I was discussing last night, when someone on my budget committee said, if we have a rainy day fund and this isn't a rainy day, what is? So here was our opportunity to help our businesses to become more forward thinking and forward looking as we enter an era where we are going to try and take some risks and be a little bit more responsive to our business communities. So if there are no other questions, I'd entertain a motion, see if we're ready to take this leap, or if you have some amendment or proposed alteration to it.
I move to direct staff to establish a COVID-19 emergency business assistance program using the funding available through the city's economic development plan loan fund and based upon the criteria outlined in the staff report dated May 19th.
Thank you, Councillor Schinkel. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Lopez. Any further discussion? Do we need a roll call? No, this isn't a money vote. It's, yeah. No, yes, no. No, I will take a voice vote on this. So all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 I get Roxanne and John. All right, thank you. Any opposed? All right, Suzanne, Chad, thank you so much. And Janet, we'll look for that supplemental budget. But we really, really appreciate the work on this. And like you said, Suzanne, it's not like you haven't had anything else to do. So really appreciate you taking on this sort of new work and our partnership with Independence. You, I think you, again, I say this regularly, but you would all be amazed at how quickly those helping hands are offered, how easy it is to get to yes when we are talking about doing things together now. And so this is going to be a great example of that, and appreciate Suzanne and a good chance to work with Sean Irvine, who is an amazing mentor on this stuff. So thanks, Chad and Janet and Suzanne.
Thanks.
All right. Unless there are any council comments, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Okay.
Good. Everybody's quick on the button tonight. All right. Uh, all right, we are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much for your participation and attention tonight.
Night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Stay well.
Thought
Bye.
I was going to have to make the motion myself.
Bye.